let's go back to right around January 15th, okay? I'll set the stage. Joy Taylor, and if you guys don't know who Joy Taylor is, she's the co-host or personality for Colin Cowherd for, what is it, Fox?
Yes.
I believe so.
Fox. And she says in a tweet, the NFL now has one black head coach, and that was on right around January 15th. So my guy Hancock says, just saw this post from a young lady, Joy Taylor. I don't know her. She doesn't know me. Joy, let me enlighten you on this as it pertains to sports and the world that I've known to be at the professional level. And I know people of color that have played professional sports that would agree with me. As a professional organization, you can be purple, pink, orange, red, Hispanic, black, or white. Every major city has expectations of championship. If it's not, your city stinks. Maybe I'm wrong. With that said, again, I don't care if you're copper, teal, turquoise, lavender. If you have the qualifications to get a job and you're the best man for the job, let's get to work. No owner in professional sports, regardless of the sport, will justify losing or unsuccessful seasons over any color. Stop. Diversity in professional sport has nothing to do with race. If I was employed by the Texas Rangers, because we're here in Dallas-Fort Worth, I could care less if you were invisible. My job is to draft players that can one day help the big league club. If you can play, you can play. If you hit 325, 25 bombs, 100 RBIs, as a shortstop, don't care if you're pink. Stop making everything about the color of someone's skin. It's absolutely exhausting. That's where it started. OT, Omar, Kyle, Mo, and myself all worked together for a number of years, 4 or 5 years, right? OT hops online and he's like, yo, respectfully, I disagree and I'd love to have a conversation about it. And that's what this is about, having dialogue, because that's how we're going to shorten this gap. And so it took a lot of guts, courage to put it out there, and you're willing to talk about it. So I want to go to you, Kyle. Where and why did that come from?
Man, I think you prefaced the whole, I guess, the conversation, the reason we're here before the show. When I say exhausting, it's exhausting that we still live in a time in today's world that we're still having these conversations. You know, for me, I've never met a stranger, whether it's sports, business, anything that I do in my life. I've never looked or evaluated an individual or looked down upon an individual because of their color.
Right.
Just to what I said, I mean, and again, it pertains to sports because that's my background, that's what I still do, that's what I was involved in, you know, at the professional level. And for me, you know, I was just talking about this the other day, I can count on one hand how many African Americans I played with in the Rockies organization during my 4 years with them. I can count on no hands how many Asians I played with. I can count on one hand how many Hispanics I played with. You know, so I think for me, when you talk about and you backtrack on where we're at and on the baseball side of things, I think it's something where kids are driven to sports that they, one, feel comfortable in, two, that they're around in their upbringing, so to speak. when you look at on the baseball side, not playing with other people of color, and then you look at people of color in a managerial position, I can't speak to the numbers on how many of those folks are interviewed, how many are qualified, how many get jobs, how many don't get jobs.
Yeah.
But I think the numbers speak for themselves from a sense of they're just not there relative to how many people are getting those opportunities.
Especially in other sports.
For sure. Now, I would be a fool to sit here, and I think I would be very unintelligent to turn an eye to there is an issue with not enough people of color at the professional football level. If you look at the professional football level, I don't know, I mean, I would throw out a percentage and say 90% of people of color. What are those numbers? And that's something I don't know. Of you have the Rooney Rule, you have these things that the league has implemented to get people in the door and to have those conversations. I do think there is some arrogance with ownership. If you're talking about billionaires, they may not feel comfortable with a person of color leading their team. There's a lot of things that I think are going into those types of decisions, but I think going back to the origination of the post was you win games, you keep your job. You don't win games, we're going in another direction. I will also make another point too. On the baseball side, they're trying to, in the collective bargaining agreement, talk about teams not tanking in their seasons to ultimately get better draft positions. So when you look at how all that correlates with maybe a person of color that may get a managerial position for 1 to 2 years, and they're the scapegoat to get them out of that job to have another guy come back in, that's something that can certainly be talked about for sure. I think all in all for me, it's exhausting that we're still having this conversation. Like you said, we got to close the gap. We got to do better as people.
For sure. So OT, you see the post, and for people that don't know you, and obviously we've developed a relationship, you're not one to really post a lot, right? We all understand in this day and age with social media that things can be twisted, taken out of context, hijacked, the actual content that you're trying to deliver being hijacked. But you went out and you said, wait a minute, hold on. I need you to understand a different perspective. Talk about why you said what you said and what promoted that idea that, look, I need to help dispel what he may believe.
First and foremost, I believe I know Kyle a little bit as a person. And because I'm comfortable with his character, I felt like I could certainly say something that would just change a little bit of the thought process, or at least open a different perspective for a guy like Kyle. Like you said, I do not post a lot, and it's simply because there's so much ignorance in the world, and for people that don't know you, don't know where you're coming from, they say things to try to bait you into ridiculous conversations that I really just don't have time for. Mm-hmm. But for Kyle, who I wanted to simply say, being in the same arenas that you've been in, being black or a person of color, there is a different avenue that isn't traveled as often in these conversations. Again, I didn't want to have it on social media, so I did think that an opportunity for us to discuss it, albeit I said, somewhere off of Baseball Diamond at a restaurant or a bar,
no doubt,
so that we could have a different type of dialogue and kind of make you, or just express some feelings that I have dealt with and many that I know have dealt with over the years in terms of why we are where we are. Don't really know what the solution is, with one exception, and that's to change some ownership. But that's probably not something that's going to happen anytime in the near future for the most part. So I guess just maybe understanding a little bit more about our perception of what is happening, so that when you talk to people on a regular basis that probably feel the same way that you do initially, you might be able to share or enlighten them on some things coming from somebody directly that has a different perspective, that has been in the professional ranks, knows people in the professional ranks, understands a little bit more about conversations that we have, so that you can share those thoughts with them, and maybe as we all begin to have different conversations with different perspectives, we can start to change the narrative.
No doubt. Well said.
So I want to stay on this point, but I also want to know, I do agree with you, right? But as we had our conversation, I think that there's a different viewpoint on the black side as well. But before we get into that, I want to hear, oftentimes, Mathew, you'll hear black, white all day long. But as a Hispanic, you know, what is your interpretation? Or do you ever feel left out?
Yeah, it's been interesting my whole life, because if you think about it, I mean, I'm just stating factually, like, I feel like most people think I'm white. So, like, even though I have minority status, I get to hear what, you know, they think I'm white. So I'm here to report, like, it's actually really funny.
I need that report on Monday.
So I had a Hispanic friend from SMU, and his name's Ralph, and we were in study group together like first year, but we didn't know each other that well, and someone called me Lopez in front of him for the first time, and he was like, "Lopez? What? You're Mexican?" And he was like, "You're one of us?" And I was like, "Yeah, man." He was like, "Well, what do they say?" And I'm like, "Who?" And he's like, "Who do you think I mean?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's about what you think, you know, like some of that, unfortunately, I'm just saying, like, if we're gonna be candid, like some of that's there, and it's if the however, you know, the communities or whatever are honest amongst themselves, or, you know, to themselves, like there's some form of that in every community, like the Italian community, the Jewish community, the African American community, like whatever you want to talk about, there's a little bit of that in there if you're honest about what you talk about at the dinner table. And even just if you're categorizing someone or treating and responding to them differently, like as a child, your child heart knows there's something wrong with that. The first time you see that in your life, you're like, what is that? Why are you saying this person is whatever difference, and why are we treating them differently than we would treat other people? Like the first time you see that, I feel like as your child's heart, you know there's something inherently wrong with it. Now, what's interesting is like I've always kind of embraced Hispanic culture, like traditions, like even what I love to cook. Like I'm very much like into that side of my culture. I'm also, you know, white too, but my family's from New Mexico. And so, but what's interesting for me is like I don't ever feel like it's been a burden to me, because I've gotten to experience like the heart of who everyone is. And like you were speaking to Kyle's character, like I feel like you can know the character of a community and their value system, and you can navigate towards that, and take more of an inclusive approach to everything. And I think that's the only way you can do it. Like further dividing doesn't seem to be the answer. I got to experience it with open arms. I mean, some of all of my best friends from my childhood are African American or Asian, and it's just the school that we went to and kind of how I grew up and like being in sports. Like, so I feel like I have the richness of that side of life and some blue collar, like every man is equal experiences in jiu-jitsu and just really any sports. It's the common denominator. And the inclusivity of it versus the division has been better. I've benefited from affirmative action in all likelihood, because of just the way our society is choosing to address some of this stuff, whether it's right or wrong. Like I really don't know, but I think that I was given perhaps an opportunity at SMU, you know, because of my last name and my status as Hispanic. But look, I'm going to acknowledge that as like a kind of a branch that society was extending. Like if we want to allocate resources to historically, socio-economically disadvantaged communities, like I feel like I grabbed a hold of a rope. Mm-hmm. And so I'm recognizing it. I'm recognizing that at times we need that. But we definitely don't need to do it at an expense of like clashing with another class, like however you label it. Like it's a system that you can't have a scale, you can't have an account and like try to rectify everything. It just seems to perpetuate and further the divide. So I feel like, real quick, my finishing that thought, I feel like my life is somehow, I was trying to think about my perspective and how it might be unique. Like I feel like the times where things are going wrong is the time I was resisting, and the times that things are going right is when you're living a diverse, rich life, hanging out with everybody and treating everybody according to the principles that like your brothers. And if everybody's your neighbor and we treat them like that, it tends to work out really well. And instead of basing, like, MLK's dream was to have people judged by the content of their character.
Right.
So, you know, there's part of me that the affirmative action part that may have benefited my life that kind of hurts, right? Because I want to be evaluated for who I am and not necessarily some weird wrong you're trying to right that I may not know about or I may not deserve. I don't know who you decide deserves that, you know?
So you're almost saying like the Rooney Rule in reverse.
Yeah.
Has had an impact.
Yeah, like, you know, it tears on my heart both ways, because it's like to acknowledge that you're a beneficiary of it, but then like how you were the one that reaped the reward for this wrong that was committed against other people or classes of people. It's just a very odd feeling when you think about it. Now you're thankful for it, right? Like, you're thankful for the opportunity, man. Like, but I'm also not going to forget it.
Yeah, and to both points, I think it's sad that a rule that has a name and what its implications are was ever implemented in the first place. You know what I mean?
The fact that it had to be.
Correct. That it was acknowledged, that the league and everyone that was involved in making the decision to implement the Rooney Rule, at the end of the day, that it's sad that we have to acknowledge that and then implement something to make organizational owners and those people bring in people of color just to give them a chance to sit at the table.
Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Knowing how you grew up, where you grew up, your current core group of peers, do you honestly feel like without some type of Rooney Rule or something of the like in place, that minorities of any culture would have had an opportunity to gain some ground?
I can speak to it from a financial perspective, and what I mean by that is where I grew up in a double wide trailer on welfare. I lived in Waco, Texas, divorced parents. We were forced to move back in with my grandparents. At that point, my mom had my sister, second kid. We had to get out of Waco. There was no opportunity in Waco. So I've done, not to toot my horn, I've done well for myself financially. I've been surrounded by great people. I've had a lot of supporters in my life, a lot of people that I've leaned on to get me to where I am now. At the same time, I would say no to your question. No, I would say no. And I think the way that you articulated and put it was very well put.
Pete?
Yeah, I want to hear from you, Pete, from a culture that historically isn't talked about often until recently with all the Asian hate that was going on. You get to sit back, or I shouldn't say that. You see from the external perspective, like, okay, here we go again, or you know, but what about us? Like, our people were enslaved too. You know what I'm saying? like.
Well, to add on to what Mathew was talking about and what y'all were just discussing just now, it really is, you know, and the conversation then may be a little different than the conversation now, because there's an increase in more Asian or Asian American athletes playing in sports or coming to light, having more exposure versus then. So there's still an underrepresentation, but if you think about it, like even when I was growing up, it's like, oh, you only made the team because they need to hit a quota. And so then you start to second guess yourself as an individual or even as an athlete. It's like, man, so was I good enough to make the team, or is what they're saying true? Like, oh, they didn't have an Asian on the team and they need an Asian representation, so that's the only reason why you're on, you know? And so, we get to sit back because, again, I think it really comes down to like your upraising, you know, as an individual, as a child growing up. Like for us, we were taught, like for myself, I was taught to just, you know, fly under the radar, take low risks, don't bring attention to yourself, but do what you got to do in order to thrive, survive, and so forth.
Do you think that lesson is taught in most Asian homes?
I feel like it is. I mean, I'm not saying that other cultures don't teach, but I think it's predominant in the Asian culture. Even now. I mean, if you think about the most recent, top of my head, Insanity.
Yeah.
You know, he was third string. So if you think about it, if he didn't get the opportunity to play because of whatever happened and how he performed in that one night, and then carried over the next 2 weeks, would we even know who Jeremy Lin was and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. And does that bring more light to other Asian athletes, like, you know, recently Chloe Kim, you know, when she performed her snowboarding, or Naomi in tennis, and so forth. So it's like, if you read about Jeremy Lin, I mean, he graduated from Harvard. Again, it's school versus athletes, or being an athlete. You know, so you have the internal battle and external battle as an Asian American athlete, you know, because going back to what your parents taught you or bringing up, it's like, hey, school, education, because that's quote unquote safe. You know, that's something you can fall back on. Versus taking a risk of going into sports, and are you going to make it, or are you not? You know, are you willing to take that risk and go in and become a pro athlete and then not make it? So if you think about the representation of Asians in, let's say, the top 4 pro leagues, whether it's, you know, baseball, basketball, football, or hockey, it's like there's barely any, you know.
I think there's one kicker in the
there's one kicker
right,
in the NFL.
For Atlanta, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so if you ask kids, like, it's your name punter, or it's your name kicker, it's like, they even know who he is.
Yeah.
You know, and this guy can kick, he has a leg.
Right.
And so I think the underrepresentation is there for a reason, whether it's personal with them, hey, you know what, I got to make my family proud, I got to go towards the education aspect of it. But at the same time, the external factor is that society doesn't feel like Asians are athletic enough. Like, they can't perform at an elite level.
And that's where I wanted to go kind of next, because we're talking about ownership, GM, head coach, right? Because it stemmed from the Joy Taylor post. Do you ever look up and say, shit, like, y'all are never going to give us a consideration as the Asian community at large?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I have this conversation with my friends too whenever we see conversations like, oh, you know, black, white, you know, minority as coaches or as leaders, and it's like, man, Hispanic and Asians aren't even in this conversation. Yeah. And they probably won't be in this conversation until maybe even 50 years down the line, as more and more Asians or Asian American athletes, you know, are starting to come to light or being more accepted socially or into, you know, pro sports or even in college, you know. And so we sit back and we watch, and it's like, okay, so where do we chime in, or do we just sit back and kind of observe?
Yeah,
and
I think
see where this goes?
I think that's my thing, and I think we alluded to that in a couple comments in the post of, you know, there's not other people, the Asian community, the Hispanic community, that are, hey, raising my hand, and I'm going to be a loud enough voice to say, well, why aren't there, you know, Asian head coaches, offensive coordinators, even to hold any sort of position, not just head coach, who's always on camera. Yeah. You know what I mean? You know, the Caucasian, we're not raising our hands saying, why are we not in the NBA? Why is there not more Caucasian people in the NBA? And I think that goes back to the conversation that we had to start the program. Was I think it stems from the youth and where you gravitate towards, and what your passion is in sports. If we're just going to talk about sports specifically,
no, I think
you know, I grew up when we first moved from Waco to Garland. We moved right across from Lakeview High School. My 2 best friends were Kevin and Tracy. They're brothers, and we played basketball until back then. As you know, we'd go inside when the streetlights came on.
That's right.
And again, it was a different time at that point. But forever, I wanted to play basketball. I wanted to be a basketball player. But I didn't love basketball. I got on the baseball field and I loved baseball. I loved playing golf. Can I go out and hoop? Yeah, I can go out and hoop. I ain't gonna be in the NBA. I'm gonna be honest with you. So it was never a passion for me to go aspire to chase that. So therefore now I don't raise my hand and have those arguments in that space. I mean,
but
to your point.
The difference to that, though, is that there are white head coaches
yeah, no question.
Basketball.
No question.
There are white general managers
Yep.
in basketball. There
Yep.
are white owners in basketball. Mm-hmm. You know, and even there.
Well, you know, Alex Rodriguez is now, he owns the Timberwolves.
Oh,
he's got part ownership
yeah.
of the Timberwolves. So I think that might be one of the first Hispanic.
Yeah.
And how many black NBA owners are there? Jordan?
Just say Jordan, And I believe that's it until
That's it.
until LeBron retires and decides he wants to get part of it.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about the conversation is, like, everyone's made great points, but a lot of times, like, you watch stuff unfold, and we're talking about sports, right? Like, so it's really a microcosm of America. We're always having this conversation. Okay, well, how do we make it better? How do we, those of us who are progressive thinkers, okay, how do we push the ball forward? Like, okay, we recognize the problem, but okay, well, what can we do to solve it to make things better? And people say it's about just our country at large. I always say, well, if we're really, really serious about making things, I don't even know what the word is, equal, but making things to where we can all look each other in the face and say, okay, we're going in the right direction. I always say, hit the reset button. Like, tear all what's that?
How?
My theory is like, hey, tear everything down to the studs and start over. Like, take the original Constitution, all those documents, tear everything up, and let's start over so where everyone can have a seat at the table. And the first time I told somebody about it, he was like, what do you mean? I said, man, look, he was one of my white friends. I said, man, you realize if we went in a time machine and we walked into them writing the original articles of the Constitution and all that stuff after we defeated England, I said, you realize if I walked in the room, they would look at you like, hey, why is that dude even in here? I said, the country was birthed from that perspective. Like, not to mention technology advances, all that other stuff, but it was written from the perspective of literally one group of people, as if they were the only ones who mattered in the forming of this country. Right now, of course, they didn't know what would happen, 300-400 years from now, obviously, but like, that's how I'm going to start over. Now, back to sports, we're talking about, like you said, billionaires. You're talking about a super small pool of people. And the thing about it is, you're talking about, what, 32 teams? So you're talking about 32 billionaires. There's obviously a lot more than 32 billionaires, but you're talking about, you got to, in order for diversity, yeah, we do need some type of form of black ownership in the NFL. But how many black billionaires are there in the world? Like, okay, Oprah, Jay-Z, Dr. Dre, LeBron will be one soon,
Tiger.
Michael Jordan, Tiger. Okay, so 5 or 6 people.
No, there's more than that.
Yeah, but how many? There's more than that. But how many of them do you actually know of, and how many of them that actually have an interest in sports? Like the black dude who owns the Weather Channel. That dude could buy a team tomorrow, but that guy's.
He can't.
What's that?
He can't buy a team tomorrow.
Well, financially he could.
Right.
But to your point, he would be put through the ringer in regards to the ownership process.
But in contrast, would his white counterpart have to be put through that same ringer?
Probably not.
And that's the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? To your point.
It's almost viewed as the good old boy system.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
It is a good old boy system.
Yeah.
And I think what OT was trying to help create a different lens for you, or anyone, I should say, because I'm not singling you out, is that they're not the same opportunities, which is why the Rooney Rule exists, right? So Byron Williams,
the conditions at that time were such that where they didn't have a choice but to make the Rooney Rule. And to your point, we would all love to get to this utopia to where those type of conditions didn't even exist.
Correct.
Then at that point, everyone could truly be judged on their own merit, the content of who they actually are as a person, versus all the different boxes that we check coming into the door.
Yep.
And will there ever be that time in America? We'd all love for it to be that way.
Right.
We're all old enough to also understand that it's like just the way our country is structured. That's one heck of an uphill climb. Have we made progress? Yeah, but are we anywhere near where we need to be?
there's generations that have to die off.
Exactly. It's a sad but true statement.
That's why I said new ownership, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah, unless the guy who owns the Weather Channel, Byron
Williams.
I think it is Williams, but like somebody of those means, like or Jay-Z or somebody of those means needs to have the money first before you even get through the process.
Even when they have that money, you still got to be voted in.
Absolutely.
I think it comes down to opportunity.
Well, the Broncos about to be for sale.
Being given the opportunity, not necessarily having the means, but being given the opportunity where someone's willing to take a chance and be like, you know what, let's do it. And that's a whole nother conversation too. And maybe that's coming from an Asian standpoint. And it's like, all we need is an opportunity. Like, I want to show you what I'm capable of doing. Give me the opportunity. If I mess up, that's not on me. But I was given the opportunity because if you were able to take a chance or gamble on me as an athlete and bring me on into the team, let me show you. And it's like, man, I'm glad I went with that kid.
Well, on opportunity in the bones of that post, I don't care if you're black, white, orange, teal, turquoise, Jeremy Lin. Jeremy Lin got his opportunity. To your point. Jeremy Lin can play. There's a reason he's in the NBA, but he took advantage of his opportunity. And at the end of the day, he prolonged his career. If you backtrack and he doesn't get that opportunity, he might be out of the league. He might play another year. And to your point, he doesn't gain the marketing money. He doesn't gain the fame. I mean, there's a lot of things that go along with what he was able to capitalize on by giving his opportunity. And he took advantage of it.
Right.
So we're talking about opportunity, and you and I were talking about this. Both of y'all coach youth sports, youth baseball, and the conversation, similar to what you were saying within the Asian community, hey, just kind of fly under the radar, take care of your books, blah, blah, blah. Well, what we were told, I know, at least us two, I'm sure you too, is you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as much. Mm-hmm. So when I say that, anybody, how does that resonate with you? Like, do you comprehend what that means?
I mean, I don't think anybody can comprehend that. That's absolutely unfair. It's, I mean, being taught that or hearing those words from my parents at your child's heart, I mean, yeah, that would be tough to comprehend and understand.
Like, those are conversations that I believe are still happening in 2022.
Call every minority kid, black or Hispanic or Asian, which I do believe Asian culture has and is getting a stronger representation in baseball, for sure. Mm-hmm. Before I finish that point, you know there's one Hispanic owner in football, right?
Who? Is there?
Artie Moreno.
Okay.
Moreno.
All right.
Oh, baseball.
Yeah.
Football.
Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah.
No, that's Arthur Blank.
Arthur Blank. Okay, then who's...
Artie Moreno owns the Angels.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Sorry about
Yeah.
that. Well done.
So not in
Well
the
done.
NFL, but baseball.
But
Okay.
in MLB. Okay.
I know there are a ton of Latino executives in Major League Baseball. There's a bunch
Yeah.
of them. But that's for a whole nother reason.
Yes, it is.
We need to go down that road.
That's a whole nother reason. But yeah.
Where I was going with that is for every minority kid that I coached for as long as I've done it, I have to separate them at some point and speak with them individually. And I think the first question I ask them is, how important is this to you? Like, what do you really want to gain from this? Because I kind of want to help myself work with them based upon what their goals are. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want to be overbearing if this isn't really what they want to do long term today. Right. So I ask them, what's your goal? And of course, most of them tell me they want to play college baseball. Then I tell them right then and there, you have to do twice as much to get half as much. So you have to hit 400 while somebody else can hit 320. You have to have a 990 fielding percentage while somebody else can have a 910. In terms of your visual perception, you cannot walk out to a park or on the field and not look presentable in every aspect of the game, because every box that they can check that works against you, they will check that much quicker versus give you the opportunity to maybe not check that box.
And no margin for error.
When you hear that, like I said, both of y'all coach, like,
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can't speak to that because that's not how I personally would view that. If I'm the recruiting coordinator at the University of Arkansas, if a black kid and a white kid both hit 375, they both play shortstop. You know, you can go through all the tools, right? I'm going to now look at character. I'm going deeper into who the kid is as opposed to.
But all things being equal, character checks out, straight A student.
Well, I don't think there's a wrong. I don't think there's a wrong answer in who you take.
Well, at that to your point, though, I see what you're asking. When it gets to that point, then it comes down to the character of the person making the decision.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, but at the same time, if all boxes are the same and you're talking about the same person, whoever that person is that is making that decision you can't put him in a position to say, he's making a choice based off of color.
I'm not saying that.
I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying that is the world that we live in now too.
What I'm saying is all boxes are being equal. It may, and they're checked. What may happen is, you know what, this is in Arkansas. I don't know if this black kid can deal with the racial stereotypes that he may have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go with Johnny instead of Jerome.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's going to be something as to why that person makes the choice to go with A kid or B kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you talk about it with your kids all the time, like we do. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the box that isn't the fifth tool. It's the intangibles of who that person is. Is he liked in the community? Does he take care of his grades in school?
Is he going to be a headache when we get him on campus?
They're making an investment in that individual as a person, and if they have to take time upon their day to worry about, is he going to go to class? Is he going to show up on time? You know, so those coaches are going to cross-check everything that they possibly can to make sure that they're getting the right person. The right person with the right tools that applies to that school.
In my experience and with the statistics that we currently see, and we can get very granular with metrics, right? But when you just look at the field, whether it's the College World Series or any day at Dallas Baptist University, you take a look at the field, it's overwhelmingly the majority.
No question. I can't disagree with you.
So really what we're saying is oftentimes there is enough of the same boxes checked on both sides of the coin. But most of the time the decision is made to go with the coin that looks like me.
Let me ask you a question from a baseball standpoint, because I'm not as well versed in baseball as as I'm in football and basketball. And I was a part-time baseball fan as a kid, right? But one of the things I noticed as I was a teenager and growing up is, and we all grew up in the steroid era. Excuse me. I remember very distinctly how Mark McGwire was treated versus how Barry Bonds was treated. Right? Both guilty of the same thing. Whatever. We're not going to talk about this steroid stuff. But I remember.
Well, Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer.
To your point.
But he is.
To your point, we get to my question. For the young black kids who grew up in that era, like us, or who had parents who were aware of society and things like that, you saw at the time probably the best player in baseball. You saw that man being, publicly tarred and feathered,
No question.
versus Mark McGwire, who's doing the same exact thing, be celebrated.
Now, Mo, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
But I try to be really, really fair, okay?
Yeah, and this is me
Try
not
to be
being
honest.
well versed in baseball. And I'll get to my point in a second. Go ahead.
In my thought process, really paying attention to that era, because I was deep in it. Sammy Sosa, the whole nine, Ken Griffey Jr., my all-time favorite baseball player. I really believe one of the reasons why Barry Bonds was vilified while Barry Bonds was lifted was because Barry Bonds was an asshole.
Absolutely he was. He absolutely
And
was.
from the court of public perception, especially when it comes to media,
writers.
if you're an asshole, then they're going to paint a picture that's going to dig your hole a little bit deeper.
Correct me if I'm wrong, he never admitted to it, right? As opposed to McGwire, who did finally come out and admit to it.
Well, he's also never tested positive in a steroid test either.
No.
It's all been perception. McGwire tested positive for Andro at the time.
Which was not necessarily
which
on
was
the
not
list.
went on the list
the
at that
ban
point in
list.
time.
So, from a marketing perspective and a PR standpoint, when McGwire was first popped and he was interviewed, he's got bottles of Andro up on in his
Right.
locker. Well, it wasn't on the ban list at the time, so I'm doing whatever I need to do to help myself.
legal.
It's legal.
My point being to all that was that, I always see baseball as like, okay, we got to get back in the African American community, all these initiatives, blah, blah,
The
blah.
RBI programs.
Yeah. Every time Jackie Robinson Day comes up, all that stuff, right? All the rigmarole, whatever. But from y'all's perspective, maybe it's the writers, baseball, I don't know, you tell me, again, y'all are more well versed in it. Did the way that Bonds was handled and treated and the way that African Americans saw that play out in real time, do you still feel like that has an effect today? Because if you're a parent and you grew up in that area, you're like, and my son can play baseball versus he can go play football, basketball, whatever sport, I don't want you dealing with that because this man is a certifiable Hall of Famer, literally one of the best players to ever walk earth play this sport, and he's a villain just because he was an asshole. But come game time, he's a villain. Come game time, he's a Hall of Famer, no questions asked. Or you can go play football or go play basketball and not even have to worry about that headache. Is that something that baseball could have done better to handle that or to manage the damage that might have caused?
I don't know. I don't know if it's something that they could have done better. Again, I think Barry Bonds was a culprit.
Oh, he definitely played a role.
In a lot of the way he was treated. I will use Derek Jeter as an example. For Barry Bonds, there's also Derek Jeter, who's a golden boy. Mm-hmm. So for any parent that has an issue with how Barry Bonds is treated and maybe this isn't the direction that we want to go, then let's talk about Derek Jeter and maybe this is the direction that you should go.
Okay.
In my opinion, the biggest divider right now in youth sport from majority to minority is economics.
No question.
It's purely economics. It is very, very expensive to play the game of baseball.
No question.
The other sports are not nearly as costly and have done a better job of including corporate dollars to help facilitate
there it is.
those means.
You know exactly where I'm going to go.
Go ahead.
Right?
Proceed, sir.
So baseball is more expensive, right? Why? Is that this new
that's a
way,
hot button.
Yeah, new age, new way to
That's
to
a hot
redline?
button.
Is that a new way to redline?
I believe it is because it doesn't need to be that expensive.
Well, you got to
It
ball
doesn't
that.
need to be.
Well, youth sports has turned into a business at the end of the day.
Oh, it's a full-blown cottage
every
industry.
sport.
I mean, you look at, it's been in every publication known to man. I mean, Time Magazine's put in an evaluation, which in the industry I'm in now, if you try to evaluate what our space is, you're just throwing a number at the wall. There's no way to really identify it.
Is it done to protect America's favorite pastime?
I think it's just people have understood that there's money to be made in that space. To protect the pastime, I don't think
I'm
so.
being polite. I'm being very polite. What I mean is to keep baseball white.
Okay.
Football is the highest grossing sport, not hands down, not even close.
The golden goose that keeps printing eggs.
And there's more equipment that's involved. There's more that has to be done to play a football game or practice than baseball. Facts?
Yeah.
Okay. So why is the cost so significantly higher to play baseball? Don't tell me, we travel. Football players travel. Basketball travels.
Mm-hmm. Basketball is criminal. They play way too many games.
Baseball does too. Though.
I don't necessarily feel like, and maybe I need to be more educated, I don't feel like basketball and football are used for business as of yet. I don't feel like people are trying to make living money off of it in the youth arena.
I would say you need to be more educated
Okay.
because it is.
The AAU circuit.
I have a
basketball
cousin
circuit
who coaches the same style of baseball, and the stories he tells me, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like it's a cottage industry. Youth sports
I think
is a cottage
what
industry.
everybody hears on the basketball side is the recruiting aspect of it, and not so much to your point of the financial aspect in youth sports.
Right.
It's more of a what's going on that's not legal to get X kid to X school.
Right, that's why I said I'm not educated.
More apt to, we got X teams, this, that, and the other, these facilities, we're making, all that whole deal.
But hit the rewind button, and I want to hone in on this. Is this the new age version of redlining?
It's $1 million question.
You outprice everybody to where only quote unquote
is a
the rich
million-dollar
white
question.
kids can play.
But why would you want to do that? I mean, I'm just asking the question. I'm not saying.
No.
Just saying, like, what? Whoever's in power, why would they want to do that? Because if you look at the demographics, like, you'd be offending more than half your audience.
No, you wouldn't.
So,
By
okay.
Because you're
keeping,
protecting-
well, I'm really asking here, but like, if you're just somehow race agnostic and you're operating an organization, you don't necessarily, well,
You're just focused on your organization, but at large, when you go from a global perspective, It's the same thing that we do in our communities right now. Why is it when you cross the tracks, houses are worth, I'm just giving an example, $150,000, when on the other side, by closer towards Deep Ellum or whatever, now they're $500,000. Same house, same square footage, everything's the same, but there's a difference. It's just new age redlining. And the reason why you would do this, and this is all speculation.
Tell me why. I just can't figure out the motivation.
To protect that one sport.
But then no one's gonna watch it because the society will progress beyond you, just demographically, right? Like half your audience is gonna be like, why is no one representative of our community there?
So look at the baseball numbers right now for TV. And both of y'all can speak to how they've been on the decline for years.
Yeah.
Especially since, Bonds and Sosa and all of them have retired. Baseball's been going down.
Well, I've listened to multiple.
Kind of illustrating what you're
I've
saying.
listened to multiple
episodes,
and I've heard you talk about it multiple times. You're a traditionalist.
100%.
So when you look at baseball now, there's a lot of traditionalists that are pissed off watching today's game.
Boy.
You talk about, folks dying off. Well, there's a hell of a lot more traditionalists in the game of baseball that still follow baseball as opposed to the kids of today's world who it's a bat flip or it's swagged out gear, it's cleats, it's flair. I mean, those people do not sit well with the traditionalists of the game.
Where did that swag and the bat flip
Oh man,
honestly
who
come
brought
from?
that?
Who brought it to the game?
As an uneducated baseball fan, who brought that to the game?
That's the South American culture.
Yeah.
Okay.
South
The
American.
Latin Venezuelan player.
Gotcha.
And
non-white players.
Yes, for sure. And the traditionalists in the game are more white than they are color.
And they want to protect them. So
Yeah.
that, I'm just trying to answer my speculation.
You have to be open-minded when we're talking about today's game to be able to continue to grow the game and to have viewership. Because if you can't allow someone to be who they are, you're looking through a lens that is not, it's rose-colored. You gotta have people be individuals. You gotta let that shine at the end of the day.
But going back to what we were talking about on the redlining, that's why it would happen, right?
Yeah.
So and y'all can tell me because I don't play baseball. I never really played baseball. But why is baseball so expensive? You can't tell me pound for pound that you're doing more than a basketball team would do, a traveling basketball squad.
Well,
Or soccer.
So let me try to paint this picture because it's gotten to this point, but I don't know if that's what the intent was initially. And let me see if I can make this make sense. The boom in baseball really started happening when parents got upset that their child was not good enough to make quote-unquote elite teams and elite programs. That's when the boom happened, right? Because before, the way it was set up was you had one, maybe two select leagues with 8 to 10 teams in each one of those leagues, right? And then you had your city recreation leagues. So once parents figured out that there was these other leagues, they would take their kids or try to take their kids out of their rec league, put them in the elite leagues. And this happened all over
And what
the
time
world.
period are we talking? 90s, 80s?
Would you say like late 90s?
I'd say late 90s.
Yeah, late 90s, early 2000s.
And follow-up question, would that be because of an economic factor as well?
No, at the time I don't think it had anything to do with economics. I think it had to do with I want my kid to be recognized as one of the elite players versus playing in a city recreation league
There's no opportunity at the next level in the city rec.
of subpar. There was another level of play that was out there. Let me put it that way. So what happened is when parents figured out that maybe their kid was not good enough to make the elite league, then they would go make their own team where their son could be elite on that team. And then of course other parents would bring their kids out of rec leagues and start playing for elite teams or competitive teams. And then all of a sudden, the recreation leagues started having to shut down because there wasn't enough participation. Or the thought process was, my kid is better than this. So now all of a sudden, you've got these individual teams that are forming with dads who feel like their kids are select level players. So now all of a sudden, again, rec leagues go away. You have all of these quote unquote select teams. Well, so now the elite teams have to do something different to separate themselves from the select team. So that's when organizations started to form. And in order for you to really separate yourself from select to elite, there was a different cost in order for you to do that. Okay. So now the select started to recognize what the elite was doing, and they were like, well, if they're going to make that move, just like if you want to move from Oak Cliff to Plano, it was the same thing. They would say, okay, I'm taking my kid, and we're now going to consider our squad elite, and we're going to charge the same amount as what elite teams or elite programs are charging. Now all of a sudden, there's no rec, which was pennies.
$85 for a kid to play.
Select has now gone to $800,
If you're lucky.
and now we're skipping select because we want to be considered elite. Now that's $1,500, and here we are with this continuing balloon of economics going into select baseball. That was really how that happened, in my opinion. I don't think it really started with, I want to separate my kid.
It wasn't the
from
original intention. It was the
result.
the collateral effect.
But I would say, just to argue, and Pete, I'll throw it over to you next, but the same thing was happening in basketball, because I was a part of that, right? You wouldn't go to the Y or whatever. You're not worried about playing with the high school team. You're trying to travel on your select team. AAU, BCI, you know, and the same thing that was happening in baseball, maybe not to the same degree or level, but it was happening in basketball, which is why you start to see damn near full-time coaches for basketball teams that are going to coach, 6A all the way up to 14U or whatever it is. So the same things were happening. So I still don't understand, or I can't grasp why the cost of baseball is so significantly higher, other than, you know what, we want to suppress how many athletes we can have. I don't understand that. Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of unintended consequence, because to your point, I see where you're going. It's one of those things to where, yep, unfortunately, you have priced certain people out of it, and as you pointed out earlier, the game suffers a little bit because of that. And then the detour off of that highway, if you will, is Latin America, where, okay, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, we can go get a player who is uber talented. Like, we can show up to the Diamond, and this dude's playing with a stick and a cardboard box for a glove, and we can go get him for pennies on the dollar, versus getting an American player versus black or white. We had to pay that American player real money because they understand, versus we go get this kid out of Latin American country, ABC, and he's just happy to be here.
Pete, where are the opportunities? I realize you don't have kids right now, right? But like, where
I
are
have
they?
a son.
Oh, you
He's
do?
9. Yeah, and I was gonna say part of the reason why.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Well, when I got married, no, stepson.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Lopez when got married, I was gonna say anything. You had a kid,
That
didn't say
would be the
anything like
marriage
that.
You got 9 years?
I was like, wait a minute, you didn't say anything about this when we
Matthew,
had
don't
you
try to
on.
deflect. Don't try to deflect,
How do you
Matthew.
turn 9 and you?
Yeah, 9 years old. Well, son through marriage, so stepson,
Yeah,
son.
yeah.
All good.
And I was gonna say, I think like the conversation between economic status plays another vital role in the representation of Asians in sports. You know, like for me growing up, in the 80s, 90s, our parents were immigrants. And so they came over here with the survival mentality of, I have to work 1 job, 2 jobs, maybe even 3 jobs to raise our family, or even get our foot on the ground, or even put my kid through school. And so sports, of course, a lot cheaper then than it is now, but it still cost money. And they
It's
couldn't
all
afford,
relative to time, yeah,
right?
sure.
And they couldn't put their kid through sports recreationally, let alone putting them through lessons or AAU or anything where they had to pay a cost or a fee. Let alone uniform and traveling and all that, the time it takes into it. Versus now being first gen Asian American, it's like, okay, I grew up, I got to see what sports is like. I want my kids to be in that, you know, and the economic status has changed through time. It's that I can afford to put my kid through sports. And now they're playing like, you know, baseball and basketball and football and soccer. And it's like, you know what, I'm gonna put you through variety. It's costing a lot, but we're budgeting for it. And as you get older, I want you to pick maybe one or two, or maybe just one that you enjoy doing, versus me coughing up all this money to put you through it, just to put you through it.
But that was not a conversation that you would have had
Right.
with your parents.
No. If I brought it to my parents, like, hey, mom, dad, I want to join, you know, this basketball league. First thought would have been no, because you need to focus on school. But the second no would have been, where are we going to get this money?
There's been a great conversation so far. Cuff allowed me to say thank you to somebody who has supported us from jump. That's at Wiener Brown and Family Blowing Smoke Cigar Lounge. The address is 1604 North I-35 in Lancaster, Texas. Giant sign out front, Blowing Smoke Cigar Lounge. Great humidor, great staff. Make sure you get there if you're anywhere in the southern part of the Metroplex. The official cigar lounge of the TheVisionLab podcast.
That's right.
Also to say thank you to my man Warren up front here at the Blueprint, where we are actually filming this episode. He's been Johnny on the spot every time we've worked with him.
Yeah.
Warren, thank you so much. If you're out here in Arlington, Grand Prairie, this side of the Metroplex, make sure you get to the Blueprint Cigar Lounge.
Lopez and I played together. I keep calling you Lopez. I'm sorry, because that's
great.
I mean, I've known you since 7th grade. But you know, we played basketball together at ACA or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we played football together.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's your perspective from the Hispanic community on having their youth involved in sports to open up specific doors?
I mean, I don't know if there's like a huge contingency that would see sports as a means to an end for like another goal, an opportunity. I mean, I think they might love a sport and, you know, the child happens to be good at it and it goes down that path, but I don't know if it's like something like that grows from, like, you know, before Landry and what he did with certain athletes. Like, people didn't view professional football as having a second act, and, you know, and now they propel kind of, athletes are doing it everywhere, prepare that stardom into their business careers and are highly successful too. I kind of lost my train of thought.
Well,
there,
it's interesting because I would venture to guess that from the black perspective, you are saying, okay, you know what, Johnny, you're pretty damn good, so let's throw some money behind him and shoot our shot, basically. Like, we're going to invest in this kid because he may have a shot to make it in whatever sport. Is that conversation happening in y'all's communities?
Yeah, I mean, you make sacrifices definitely to, like, go to the strengths of, like, a child's skill set. Like, you will find a way to, like, you know, we did it, but, like, there were people that drove like 3.5 hours from Longview to Dallas just to make the Dallas elite teams. Like, that's gas money, that's
Food,
parents'
everything,
time,
hotels,
and doing
all that
homework
stuff.
in the
But
car.
what's
I mean,
the end result, though? Like, I mean...
well, it's kind of like the speech you give sometimes, right? It's like, in certain facts of life, it doesn't have to just be like racism, but certain facts of life, like your circumstance or whatever, you will have to work twice as hard, and that may be your reality, but you may need to hear it, and it may be the only way out. Is like, and they're like, look, that is a way out. Work ethic and persistence is a way out. You know, like, there should never be, in my opinion, a situation where you're without hope. You should be striving for a resource and hoping that we collectively as a society get it right to eventually give you a lifeline, right? I mean, that's like the whole point of humanity and society, is like to take care of, you know, those that can do nothing for you, the weak, those without a voice. Like, that's what you should be doing, in my opinion, as a society. I mean, that's how we're going to improve ourselves. Yep.
And that's 100% why we're here, right? I think the conversation is a lot more wide than just the parameters of prejudices or racism or, you know, socioeconomic classism and all this other stuff, right? Do y'all feel, does anyone feel that, you know, the African American culture will push their child to become pro to pull everybody else out? Because I think that's something that permeates.
It's definitely a part of it. I mean, yeah, and
but you don't hear that in other cultures.
No, and with our culture, what happens is somebody recognizes that James has the talent to play football, basketball, whatever. James works his butt off in high school. He gets to go to college. James works his butt off in college. He gets to go to high school. But he gets to go to the NFL or whatever professional league. Somewhere along the way, though, no one's ever really asked James, like, hey, man, is this what you really, really want to do?
It's a great comment.
And no one asked him that. But then it comes out when James is a professional, and you look up, and James is doing stuff that you're like, man, do you even really want to play?
Yeah.
Like, is this what you really, really want to do? And then, he washes out of whatever professional league in 2-3 years, not because he can't play or not because he has the talent.
Burnt out.
He's burnt out, and he thought to himself one day, like, wait a minute, I'm doing this because everyone else behind me pushed me, but this ain't what I really want to do. Mm-hmm. And then you look up and he's like, hey, I just want to go be an artist, or I want to go make video games. Because since he was 12, 13 years old, he's been pushed in this direction. Like, you are our ticket to change everything. But no one ever asked him, what do you want to do?
Well, it's funny, me personally, going through the amateur side, being in high school, played at area code, did the All-American games, was fortunate enough to be able to play at a high level. It got so overwhelming, to your point, that it was almost assumed that I was just going to go play pro baseball. Going through that process, it was exhausting. Like, I hated the business side of baseball. I couldn't stand it. It took a lot of the joy away for me in the game. Signed, I go because, again, it's just what I was supposed to do. I came home 4 days later. I wanted to go to school. I wanted to go to Arkansas. Didn't work out. Long and the short, I was able to go back and play professionally for 4 years, but there's a lot of what you're saying there that's true. I wasn't able to have conversations with myself internally on what do I want to do. It's, my family's telling me this, my friends at school, Kyle's going to go play pro, and you kind of fall into this lane, this swim lane of
you feel like you get
what's
boxed
expected.
in.
Yeah, exactly
Let
right.
me ask you this. Did you feel, was there a conversation, or did you feel the pressure from mom? Like, mom, we were in Waco, Double Y moved up to Garland.
Well, it's funny because my perspective now on the draft is what I tell people is if you get life-changing money, I think you need to take the opportunity to go play professional baseball. Life-changing money is different for everyone in this room. So going back to the comment you made earlier on opportunity, I think if you get that opportunity and it's life-changing, I think you have to take advantage of it.
But did you feel like you were...
Well, fast forward,
pushed?
so yes, in a way, and that didn't come to fruition. Love my mom to death. This is not a shot at my mom. It was kind of some tough love that I still don't necessarily think that the way that it was intended, but it's the way that it came across to me. There wasn't a member of my family that picked me up at the airport when I came home from pro ball. Walk in my mom's house. I'm unpacking my bags. Don't know if I'll ever play baseball again in my life. And she says, if you're gonna be a grown up, make grown up decisions, it's time to be a grown up. So I said, okay. I got a lot of pride.
Can't stay here.
I got a lot of pride. I said, well, I'm out. So
my shit right
I'm
there.
out. Packed my shit up. Fortunately enough, my loving wife and her family welcomed me in. I leaned on them for years, but at the same time, I was going to school. I was working 2 jobs. Had the realization, hey, I don't want to be 40 and say I never gave it a shot and never attempted to go down that road to be a professional athlete. So fortunately enough, I was able to go back and do it. But to this day, I've never asked my mom for $1. We've had some conversations on that. But to your point, when I came home, it's you're gonna be a grown up, make grown up decisions. It's time to be a grown up. It's not that I thought my mom was wanting me to help her. But it just wasn't the time for that type of love when I was 17 years old. You know what I mean?
Kyle, do you feel like many guys that you know in your circle that have been professionals, do you feel like they share a story more similar to yours? Or, I'm sorry, it'd be different. Do you feel like more people in your circle feel more like they really welcomed the opportunity versus, I know, I'm gonna speak for myself, and I know I've talked to Ryan about it, when it comes to many of us, it was that pressure of being able to take care of other people. Do you feel like it's the same in a lot of guys that you work with, or do you feel like it was more of the true passion for the game that kept him in it for so long?
Man, I think it's a case-by-case basis, and I hate to give that answer because I think with anything you do, if you don't have passion, you're not. You're wasting your time.
There's an end date on it.
Yeah, you got an expiration date on that pretty quickly. That said, if you look at each individual is going to take on that type of whether it's pressure or they're going to welcome it or they're going to take that role on whether they want to or whether they don't. I think if they have an understanding that, hey, this is a way for me to provide for my family, I mean, man, that's an individual's decision that they're going to have to look in the mirror with and say, am I going to go through hell to continue to do this, or am I going to do it because I love it and it's my passion?
Well, it's interesting because, and you don't know this, so we went to high school together, right?
Okay.
Graduated together. Going into my senior year of high school, I wasn't going to play football. Mm-hmm. Now, rewind, off-season, junior year, head coach, everyone's coming through and, recruiting and all this other stuff for spring ball. But during the off-season, my coach was like, look, you cannot be less than third on anything, on any run, any workout, any metric. You cannot be less than third. You're going to be the captain next year, da-da-da-da-da. I don't know if I was burnt out. I don't know if I wasn't mature enough, but I certainly thought for several months, I'm done. Mm-hmm. I don't want to play anymore. Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to play my senior year. I took a trip to some HBCUs, historically black colleges. Went to Howard and up in D.C. Went to Clark, Atlanta. Came back and was like, I'm done. I'm not going to play. But since we're talking about kind of fulfilling your family's dream or what have you, and I'm not saying that my parents had that vision or dream for me, mm-hmm. but I know that there was no way we were going to be able to afford for me to go to Vanderbilt, mm-hmm. right? $30,000 it wasn't happening. Mm-hmm. Plus I have a younger brother, younger sister, mm-hmm. like no. So I had that boy meets man moment, strapped on the bootstraps when we went to work and we got it done.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that we had that similar feeling like, man, I don't know, I don't want to look back at 40 years old and say I never gave it a shot. And I didn't want to look back and say I knew I was good enough, but I never tried it.
Yeah, I mean, we were blessed athletically to be able to do something that very few can do.
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers at the professional level. And the man above blessed me with a right arm, and I could spin it. And at the end of the day, it did come down to passion. And as a man of faith, I think he blessed me with the opportunity to go do that. I didn't want to look back at 40 years old and say, I had the opportunity to go chase that dream that was my dream that I did have so much passion for, and let other influences of the business side of baseball, family, whatever it may be that was pulling me. You talk about resistance and y'all's last episode of 2021. Anything that you're going through, there's going to be resistance that's going to come.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I resonate with that so much, even in everyday life. There's going to be resistance and challenges and things that are thrown at you that make you look in the mirror and say, is this something that I enjoy doing?
Yeah.
Is this something that I want to continue to pursue? Because, you throw in energy in so many different areas, it can be exhausting.
So let me try to bring it kind of full circle to the reason why we're here. That's why we're at a boiling point. So many black men have sacrificed so much. I'm going to say minorities, period, mm-hmm. have sacrificed so much for the game that they love in football. They have persevered through all kinds of challenges. And for the most part, on every stage, we feel like we are qualified to lead mm-hmm. teams on the field as a head coach and even from a general manager
and have the
perspective. Yes.
What, and Tony Dungy, is that?
Like, they always use Tony Dungy like I hate to say the phrase, but he just uses the token black dude.
I didn't know what the perspective was.
Yeah,
I just know he's
every
a great
time,
coach.
every time somebody gets in trouble, they always put Tony Dungy on TV. He comes across as this, butt pat, and oh, we got to do, like, quit using Tony as the token black dude. Like, sometimes dudes
No, I just didn't know
screw up.
who's representative of that. Like,
Well, right now,
Mike Tomlin.
Mike Tomlin, he did.
Yeah.
Well, and now today, Lovie Smith, because they're hiring him today. And they did that because of all the Brian Flores stuff. Like, that is.
but isn't that like a
glass floor.
watershed moment for the
Classic
community?
glass
Like,
floor. He's
you know,
set
like,
up for
The watershed community, the watershed moment is Brian Flores calling out the owner and saying, "Look, the man offered me $100K a game to lose.
and we talked about that earlier.
The man tried to set up a meeting with me
I
and
don't
Tom
know
Brady,
that.
and I'd have been hit with tampering. Because if you're Brian Flores, you're thinking about, okay, well, one, this is tampering, and how in the world is Tom Brady going to walk on this boat and me not be seen? So
Right.
there's that part of it. The second part is the owner is offering me $100K to lose games. So at some point, I'm probably going to be fired, and then my everything I've worked to get to this point, my integrity, not even my coaching ability at this point, but my integrity of who I am as a person
You'll be
is
vilified.
yeah. You like I'm sacrificing all of that, and so that's why I think he just threw his hands up. Was like, no, I'm not doing that. He knew he had to know he was gonna get fired once he started turning that stuff
Had
down.
a winning record.
Yeah, I mean, the Dolphins have been terrible forever, and
7 of his last 8, I think. Something like that.
yes, yeah, 7 of his last 8 or
And-
whatever.
and what they said was he was difficult to work with.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna throw this out there for, I think the three of us understand what that means. Do y'all get what that means?
it's like code for something you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, it's cold.
It's code. He
Yeah.
was difficult to work with.
If I don't go along, I don't get along.
And that's the challenge that we have. We already have the challenge of getting there, number one. Then we got to stay there. Then we got to comply. And I don't think that, and I do believe that, you know, when you're talking about head coaches, you are a pawn to the overall organization. I get
Because
that.
NFL is such all the business stuff. Like the business stuff gets in the way.
I get that portion of it, right? You have a job. You have to do what the owner wants you to do. Totally understand that. But to be a pawn in a game that you don't have any control over anything.
Yeah.
Case in point, the owner's telling you, I'm gonna pay you $100,000
Under the
per
table.
game
Yeah.
to lose.
Yeah.
I also want you to, holler at Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Like, bro, you're jeopardizing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I would venture to guess that would not take place with
Like, have y'all
Nagy.
really thought about the repercussions of this, right? Like,
Oh, he'll never get a job again.
well, he definitely put his professional career on the line.
he's
but
the Colin Kaepernick of coaching.
Well, that's where I was gonna go with it.
he put his career on the line.
Yeah.
But like this, let's say he went through with that, right? And at some point it'll come out because it always comes out. Then at some point somebody's gonna be like, hey, well, wait a minute, that's akin to fixing games. Like everything he worked for professionally was on the line, and I give him a lot of courage to be like, no, I'm not playing that game. Like he can go coach
Well,
in
this is-
college or
this is
somewhere else, but I'm
hypothetical.
not gonna sacrifice my professional integrity over that. And then okay, Tom Brady's just gonna magically appear on this boat.
Yeah.
So when we go and dock, I'm gonna walk off this boat, and people are not gonna recognize the fact that Tom Brady got off this boat after me. Like, come on, man. Like, you're asking me to literally put everything I work for. I'm sure he started coaching in middle school or high school and worked his way up. So you're asking me just to piss all the way.
And
No.
this isn't me saying that he should or he shouldn't have. The timing of it in his heart of hearts, in his child's heart, when he was initially offered $100,000 to lose games, if he believes the way that he believes after his firing, and again, I'm not saying he should have done it at that time. He could just come out then. Hey, I just got offered $100,000 to lose games by my owner, knowing that at some point you're going to go down that line anyways.
I don't know if you know that though.
Well, I know. I'm just saying. I'm throwing out a hypothetical here.
I think whenever the first time that actually happened, I think, to your point, in his heart of hearts, he probably had to know, okay, there's an expiration date on me being here. Because the second he said, no, I ain't doing that, he had to know, okay, that like I ain't going to be here long term.
Yeah.
So you, as they say, you eliminate the distractions, don't worry about the stuff you can't control. I'm going to coach my team the best I can.
Yeah.
And then when the axe fell, I'm sure he got with his people and said, okay, this is the road I'm going down, and I'm sure he had to have a conversation with himself, like, okay, I'm ready to put my coaching career on the line because this is what happened. And then the stuff with Elway and the Giants and all that. I mean, you give him credit because he was willing to take a stance and stand on it. If you was willing to stand on it, you got to.
I'll take it a step further, Kyle. I don't think that's something that would have come out if it wasn't for the conversation via text that he had with Bill Belichick. He was ready to continue to keep that in the wraps because he did not want to hinder his career long term.
That straw broke the camel's back.
But since, or as soon as he found out via Bill that he was not going to get the Giants job, that they had already decided who the head coach was going to be, therefore faking the Rooney Rule, that's when he said, you know what, I'm just going to lay all the cards on the table.
Yep.
And there's so much,
Makes sense.
there's so many different layers to this onion, right, to peel back. But the one thing I want to ask, and this is to anybody, is do you think they would have done that to someone like a Mike Zimmerman?
No, because
Bill Belichick.
dudes are afraid of Zen. They think Zen put his hands on them. But
Okay, let's go.
but I understand your point, though.
Old boy that used to be in Houston, O'Brien.
Bill O'Brien.
Bill O'Brien.
No.
Why use Flores?
I mean, you had to talk Stephen Ross, the owner, about that.
Oh, sure, I get that, but
Because
would
he
have
felt
that
like he
gall
had
if it was
the-
Jason Garrett?
What's that?
Would he have had that gall if it was Jason Garrett?
No, but I think what I was trying to say, Stephen Ross felt like he could go to Brian. He felt like he could approach him in that way.
Why?
Because Stephen
Because
Ross
he-
is filthy rich.
Because
But you wouldn't have approached a Jason
because he's
Garrett, Bill
inferior.
O'Brien.
There's
Inferiority
inferiority.
complex.
He knew that he could go to somebody like Brian Flores and get away with it
And I
at
think-
that time.
And so this is what I'm trying to impress upon you to show you a different lens, that you have the bravado. I don't care if you're a billionaire to say that to a minority head coach, but you wouldn't have the same bravado with a white head coach or general manager.
All speculation, but you could certainly believe where we would come to that thought process.
For sure.
Would you agree with that?
I will.
As a minority, is that how you see it?
I do. I mean, speaking of minorities, like, so Asians have this stigma of being the model minority.
Yeah.
Because of education or whatever reason it be, as far as that goes.
It's interesting.
And it's like, where did this title even come about? Like, how did it even come about? Is it because we just lay low and that we do what we're supposed to do, we excel in school? Again, I don't know where that stigma, where that title even came about, or where it even originated. But it's like growing up, as my sister and I got older, we would ask our parents, like, why was it, like, pounded to us to stay low, to not speak up, to not say anything, to not have a voice? You were supposed to don't draw attention to yourself. Was there a reason? And it's like, well, yeah, stay out of trouble. If you don't speak up, you don't draw attention to yourself. And if you draw attention to yourself, you can't get in trouble.
And your parents were aware enough to see all hell breaking loose when everybody else, and was like, I don't
Right.
want my kids to
Yeah.
have to deal with
But,
any of
but
that.
it's also cultural too, right?
Right, it is. And so growing up, it's like, you know, you have the people of color, black, white, you know, and it's like you feel like, you know, the black is the minority to the white, but then the Asians are now the minority to the black. It's like you get picked on.
Wow.
And it's like it's the whole inferiority. It's like, oh, you're not as athletic as them. I'm just gonna use sports, you know, since we're talking about sports. You're not gonna be able to perform with us at a certain level, and so it's easy to get picked on. We're not genetically gifted to be tall. We're not genetically gifted to be big, you know, and whatnot. But it doesn't mean that we can't perform.
Y'all mean, though.
Yeah, Asians can't be-
One on one.
Yeah.
One-on-one.
So I can agree to that statement as far as do you feel like they approach you, and in a certain aspect, it's like I get where you're coming, where they're getting at. It's like, why would you approach this individual and not this individual with that particular proposal?
So the reason why I think this is so poignant, especially in great timing, right? Because we didn't plan this, is for when your post went out, and I believe 100% that it didn't come from any ill intentions.
For
right?
sure, for sure.
Well, that's the only reason why I responded.
Right.
No question.
But now hopefully you can see like, oh shit, why would he say that to Flores but not to
Yeah.
Mike McCarthy or Bill O'Brien or Bill Belichick or any of the other 28 white head coaches out there, right? Why would he have that gumption? Why would he have that gall? Lopez, what are your thoughts?
To be honest with you, I'm kind of like having to pick up everything that's going on. I wasn't like well versed on all the background, but
So obviously, you
I
know, Brian
gist of it.
Flores got
Yeah.
fired,
Yeah.
right? Owner tells him, hey, we'll pay you $100,000 if you lose. Says no. Gets fired. Weeks later, comes out. Bill Belichick had texted him instead of another Brian.
Yep.
It was up for the New York Giants head coaching job, and told Flores, congratulations.
Like, yeah, they said that your guy, like, that he texted Brian. He thought he texted Flores, but he meant to text Brian Dable.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And of course, Belichick apologized to him, like Cuff said, and like you said too, OT. I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I think he was just like, all right, man, I'm over it.
I'm being played a fool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to
Like, you got me up here, like, I done got on the plane, and I've gone through the prep process. Like, I'm going to go in here and present myself, and I'm doing it for no reason. I think he's just like,
When a decision was already made.
yeah, I'm throwing my hands up. Like, don't have me here for a job interview. Like, and that's any of us. Like, if we go for a job interview, like, don't have me schedule this time in my day, and you've already picked the person you got. Like, just tell me, hey, we've already decided to go with another candidate.
I think, well, I know blacks are tired of being used.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we're tired
You used
of
this
work.
one term, I'm sorry. You used this one term, but I think devalued is
Better word.
even more poignant for the conversation. Why is it that it's okay for us to be successful
Up to a
in
certain
these
point.
areas, but it's not okay for us to be allowed to be successful in these areas of leadership? Now, I thought about this the other day, and it's not a scapegoat for any reason, but I do think it's worth the conversation. How much of this is potentially caught in the web of economics?
Oh,
Could
absolutely.
there be a thought process that says, if we have minority leadership, how is it going to affect sponsorship?
Of course, it's like
How
Kyle
is it
said, it's
gonna
the
affect-
business of professional sports is that's the dirty side of it that the average fan has no idea about.
So is it, knowing that, does this affect ownership decisions? Like, really
Absolutely,
affect
yeah.
ownership decisions?
Absolutely.
And should we understand that a little bit more than what we do, and maybe not put all of the blame on the ownership, maybe put it more on some of the corporations, the Coca-Colas,
They go
I'm
hand in
not
hand.
saying Coca-Cola believes that.
not saying Coca-Cola believes that, thank you for that correction.
To your point, that
That was
it
just
all
an
goes.
example.
We all know. Everybody in this room knows professional athletes, and they all have told us, offline, that the business end of professional sports is such a. I mean, you said, like, once you got introduced to the business of Major League Baseball, it soured your taste. And we all know professional athletes. They'll tell you the business side of it is a whole nother animal.
So should some of our frustration be pointed in that direction?
It
or
should be.
we keep it squarely on the ownership, saying, hey, you need to be the one to go to the corporations and say, look, I need for you to back me regardless of who I feel like is the best person to lead my organization.
Well, if you got the balls to make some of the moves that you made to be a successful business person, surely you have the balls to tell them, look, this is how we're gonna roll. If you lose your sponsorship dollars, you can be replaced.
I mean, I don't disagree. I'm just wondering if this should be part of the narrative.
Yeah, I think
it is part of it. It plays a role in it, but ultimately it's always going to come back to ownership because they're the ones who ultimately make those decisions. Like, if Coca-Cola was a sponsor of the Cowboys and the exec at Coca-Cola hates the fact that Mike McCarthy's getting another year and said, hey, we're canceling our sponsorship, Jerry's like, all right, cool, I'm calling Pepsi tomorrow. Like, or Lipton iced tea, whatever. Somebody will take that spot, no problem, like Cuff said. So does the corporate dollars play a role in it? Yeah. But ultimately, we talked about at the very beginning, you're still talking about a generation of dudes who, unfortunately, I hate to say it, some of them are going to have to kind of leave.
die off.
They
So
had to leave.
That was gonna be my question. So I think we can all agree that Hispanics or Asians representation in pro sports or even in sports in general is starts slowly increasing. So do you feel like, and of course eventually maybe we might be in this conversation as far as the debate of why isn't there Asians or Hispanics in leadership, but that's a whole nother conversation. But do you feel like as time progresses and these older generation of leaders, time expires, do you feel like that's going to change?
It will. It's going to be some more generational.
Or do you feel like it's ingrained in who who the next in line?
No, that's the danger, right? The
it's
huge
gonna stay in the
danger is
family,
it's a
right?
software code. Like
Right.
whatever value system you're instilling is speech and tradition and reinforced behaviors. It's like, what is your community doing and reinforcing?
Right.
The problem with racism is you can't really afford to have your plan A be to wait it out because it might persist beyond your waiting out
Right.
rate
Out
at the
period.
expense
Because the
of
next person that
you're
carries
still
on has the
suffering,
same
your next
value.
generation's still suffering.
Right.
So you have to address what's causing it, you know? And I think that's the hardest part about trying to kind of legislate or rule yourself into a result, because that suffers from that law of unintended consequences. If you do things like that, then you have your example of like, well, hey, then you have a potential scapegoat opportunity if you need to tank a system in order to secure a higher draft pick.
Right.
So you like have these unintended consequences. A better angle of attack, in my opinion, yes, you have to address it. Yes, you have to acknowledge it's systemic, but you've got to change what you're seeking. Like, you've got to seek for the opportunity, and you want your candidate that's representative to be chosen based on their merits, because you want them to be accepted and perform at that level once they're given, like Jeremy, y'all were talking about Jeremy Lin, once they are given the opportunity, that's your breakthrough. Because once, you know, that's why like all of the different sports heroes, like what's the guy from San Diego Chargers, you know, that committed suicide, but he was a hero, man, to that community in the NFL. And once that happens, it's kind of like when Barack became president. It's like, you've broken the ceiling. Like, your community is in that elite class. Like, it can never be taken away. And I think there's something special about achieving those breakthrough moments. And that may be what you're striving for. You may not be able to like make the NFL all of a sudden hire 16 African American coaches, but you really just need 1, 2 more. All the examples y'all gave of the guy from the Steelers and Dungy and what's the guy's Mike Tomlinson, and
now I love you.
a couple more of those on the scoreboard, and you're in the conversation of like.
But that's the problem.
African American coaches are the greatest coaches.
That's the issue, is that we've had those coaches. We rattled off several, right?
I mean,
You
Mike
had it
Tomlin
here.
outside of Dungy's got to be the longest tenured African American
Oh,
coach
yeah,
in the history of the
I'm
sport.
sure he's passed Tony
But
Dungy
we're
at this point, I
talking
think.
about what's equitable to what's in the game, right? If the league is 85 to 90% black. You got one NFL coach. Well, you had 3 last year, or whatever the number was. Okay, that's cool. But you keep changing the goal, keep moving the goalposts. You keep changing it. Now you're changing the rule. Now you want me to lose for me to keep my job. So that the OTs and the Ryan Mosleys of the world, the Ryan Coveys of the world have another opportunity. Like, the rules to the game constantly change, and until you have a seat in that room to halt or stop the changing of those rules, it's always going to be moved on you.
Yeah.
We had Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama in office, and you would think that would help move the needle forward, right? Ironically, people were so upset about that.
Yeah.
We had the next man voted in office,
Yeah.
and we took 8 steps backwards.
It's like a backlash.
In terms of NFL head coaches, there's been 27 in the history of the NFL. I kind of gave you some
27
numbers
black.
in that. Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. We've had 27 black coaches in the NFL since the modern era, which was like 1960 something. The most at one point in time, we had up to 8. It went from 8 all the way back down to 1.
And now 2 as of today.
And if you want to consider Mike McDaniel, that's
Right.
personal. But anyway.
Yeah, they're called multiracial. I believe they're calling it.
Yes. The point being that how do we continuously to move the needle forward and stop taking steps back? Another fact, of the 27 black coaches in the NFL history,
3.
there has only been 4 that have had more than a 3-year term. Only 4 that have had more than a 3-year term, which means an overwhelming majority do not really get a chance to succeed. If you were in college, you haven't even had a recruiting class graduate, and you're already let go.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we continue, not just to move the needle, but continue to move the needle forward and stop taking steps back.
I mean, you may or may not know this, but I'm curious. Of the 27 black head coaches, how many won Super Bowls?
Two.
Tomlin and Dungy.
Tomlin and Dungy, yeah.
Yeah, Tomlin. Okay.
I mean, Tom Flores is a Mexican. So yeah, so two, and then one if you want to go the whole multiracial.
Yeah, if you want to go minority non-black, we've only had 4 total.
Rivera just won a
Tom
champion
Flores,
NFC.
Yeah, NFC
Rivera, Wayne Fonts, and
Oh wow, you went back to Detroit, 91.
Robert Saleh. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, we're not going to change it, but I want to have the conversation and create perspective for non-minorities, right? It's a deep-rooted issue that won't be solved overnight.
Yeah.
But what we can do is talk to our youth, teach our youth, and instill the value system and the principles that we long for. And the reality of it is we're probably, in our lifetime, won't see it.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many different lenses to look through. And I think it's imperative for us to have this type of dialogue to gain perspective and understanding from every end of the spectrum. Right? Because it's a moving target.
Yeah. And I think going back to, we bring up the post again. I mean, that post is posted in the lens of the way that I see it.
Sure.
Again, I want the best man for the job. That's the way that I view it. I don't care what color you are.
Do you think that?
And unfortunately, as we talk through these things, it's not that I now realize that it's not viewed that way, but it has been. I've really enjoyed the conversation and really hearing from all of you guys on the perspective of how you view it and how it is in the world today.
What I've hoped to gain from being able to sit down with you, whether it was here or anywhere else, is simply that knowing that you want the best man for the job, that there's a sincere system in place that allows for you to speak with enough people of all different types for you to properly determine that you got the best man for the right job.
No question.
And as long as we can have conversations with high character men like yourself, and then you can have conversations with other high character men that you are around and that are in your circle, I think that's how we can start to move the needle a little bit at a time, because maybe a conversation you have with somebody, they have with somebody else that might have some influence
That might impact
on
them, yeah.
who's getting the right interview
No question.
in order to potentially choose the right man.
For sure.
And that's a really important thing. Whenever we go back to our normal walk of lives, and you're in your normal circles, and you hear something, the way true change is going to take place is by saying, "Well, hold on, bro. Like, you need to get a little bit more perspective." I sat down, we talked. I kind of have a better understanding and actually dive in. And I don't want to say protect, or defend, but at least share your experience.
Yeah.
Because that starts to resonate, and you have that ripple effect.
No doubt.
It's been good, Cuff. Good idea. I remember you said you wanted to do it, and I was like, all right, you know me, I'm down for it. It's been a good idea, partner.
I think, like I said, I mean, I value each one of y'all, and appreciate y'all, your time and coming out here and just chopping it up as men.
No doubt.
And I think that's the important thing too, right? Like, we kept it respectful, we kept it
For
above
sure.
board.
No doubt.
Well, that too, and we're all sane.
But I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
we're all sane.
Like, you talked about breaking the seal. You talked about breaking the seal, right, with Barack Obama becoming president. And not to belabor the point, but we also understand that there is still a segment of the population that never want to see that seal broken. And there's a segment of the population that doesn't want to look up one day and be like, oh, half the coaches in the NFL are all black. There's unfortunately, sad but true, but there's a segment of the population of our society that doesn't want to see it that way.
Yeah.
And it's just the dirty truth of it. It is what it is. It's again, like I said at the very beginning, it's a microcosm of America. It's about the roots of it all. The country was founded on some dirty roots, and unfortunately, we always have this push-pull. Every time something happens, it's a lightning rod for us as a society, but no one ever wants to talk about the true roots of the issue. And until we as a society come to grips with the roots of how this country came to be, then we'll always just be kind of spinning our wheels in the mud a little bit. Like OT said, Barack was a step forward, but then the backlash, hey, we're going to go 8 steps back. We're going to swing the pendulum the exact opposite direction. And then everything is kind of bubbled back up to the surface, and we see it once every 2-3 months. There's an incident, and you're like, how in the world is this happening in 2022? It's just the commentary and the microcosm of who we are as a country.
But even on that note, I appreciate the opportunity, when I say us, I mean like other minorities, like myself or Mathew, it's like for us on the outside watching in or looking in, it's not just a black or white conversation. It's like, where are these other minorities come to play that are, not as mentioned or not as noted, And again, we only hope through time as it changes, giving us the opportunity may give other opportunities that are watching or listening or even younger generation are like, what? Why can't we be in that position? Why do we have to downplay it? And I get there's so many different factors, but at the same time, create opportunities through just an open conversation. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Like, if you really think about it, before we wrap it up, if you really think about it, America was officially a country, 76, right? 76, 79, whatever. Just black people alone didn't have voting rights until the 1960s. So from 1776 to let's say 1960 for round numbers sake, you're talking literally just under 200 years. So it's 2022. We got a long way to go for the scales even close to being even.
Yeah. Put it in perspective like that.
Well, gentlemen, Mathew, Kyle, OT, Pete, I want to say thank y'all for jumping into the lab. Visionaries, thank you for tuning in. This has been an amazing, amazing conversation. Shout out to these gentlemen. Remember, each one of our guests are dropping nuggets of wisdom here on the Trail of Life. Ultimately, my friends, it's up to you to pick them up.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ryan Mosley. Thank you again to Pete, OT, Kyle Hancock, and my new best friend, Matt Lopez, the newly married Matt Lopez. We'll see you guys next week on another great episode of the VisionLab podcast.
Blessings.